The engines hadn't roared yet. The street was quiet, almost unnaturally so, with the afternoon sun hanging high and pale in the sky. A small boy stood on the edge of the sidewalk, trembling as if the whole world had gone cold, even under the bright light. His gray hoodie looked a size too big, his jeans scuffed, and his hands clenched at his sides. In front of him knelt a man, broad tattooed arms covered in scars and ink that told stories of roads and battles. His leather vest bore the emblem of the Hells Angels, patches stitched tight and worn with pride. His name was Ryder Hale, and behind him stood 5 of his brothers, men of iron and grit, each one silent, watching the boy as if they'd just seen a ghost. The boy looked up at him with tearful eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "They took my sister," he said, the words breaking halfway through his breath. And in that instant, the quiet street no longer felt safe. It felt like the beginning of something unstoppable. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of standing up for what's right, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. These are the stories that remind us even the roughest souls can have the biggest hearts. Ryder didn't speak for a moment. He just stared at the little boy, Evan, his name would later turn out to be, and saw something in his eyes he hadn't seen in years. Helplessness. The kind that cuts deep. Behind him, the other bikers exchanged uneasy glances. They were men who'd seen a lot of things, accidents, fights, loss, but the sight of a crying child on a quiet street always hit different. Ryder rose slowly, his boots pressing against the warm pavement, and placed one large hand on the boy's shoulder. "Start from the beginning," he said quietly. Evan explained through trembling words that his sister, Mara, only 12, had been taken. A dark van, 2 men. It happened near the park on the other side of town just an hour ago. His mother was at work and he'd been playing with her. He ran after them until he couldn't breathe, screaming her name. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped. The police hadn't arrived yet. He'd come running down the street until he saw the row of bikes gleaming like an army ready for war. He didn't even know who these men were. He just hoped someone would listen. Someone would care. By the time he finished speaking, Ryder's jaw was set like stone. His brothers didn't need to be told. They saw it in his eyes. Steel met purpose. Ryder turned toward his men, his voice low and clipped. "We ride." That was all he said. And that was all it took. Within seconds, the stillness shattered. The men moved like one body, leather creaking, engines roaring to life. The air filled with the thunder of motorcycles as Ryder lifted the boy onto the back of his own bike, strapping him safely. Evan's small hands clung to the man's vest, his heart pounding not from fear, but from hope. They took off in formation, the sound echoing down the neat suburban streets as curtains lifted in surprise. Mothers paused, gardeners looked up, and somewhere someone whispered that the angels were flying again. They rode for nearly 20 minutes, weaving through traffic with a precision that only loyalty could produce. Ryder's contact in the area, a man named Vince, had eyes everywhere. Within moments, Vince called with a tip. A black van had been seen speeding past a local gas station on Route 9, heading toward the old industrial lots by the docks. It was a place the bikers knew well. Too many wrong things had happened there. When they arrived, the sound of the engines cut off like the ending of a drum beat. The silence afterward was heavy. The van sat near the loading bay, its back doors slightly ajar. Ryder could hear faint noises, a girl's muffled cry. Without hesitation, he signaled his men. They spread out silently, ears of instinct moving faster than thought. One man crept to the back, another covered the sides. Ryder approached the van head-on, eyes hard, every tattoo seeming to come alive under the bright daylight. The first men who stepped out from behind the van froze when he saw them. He wasn't used to being hunted. Within seconds, the bikers had him pinned. Ryder yanked open the back door and found Mara frightened, wrists tied, eyes wide with disbelief. He didn't speak, just reached out and untied her gently, his movements careful, almost fatherly. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice breaking the tension. Evan ran toward her the moment she was free, wrapping his arms around her as if he'd never let go again. For a long moment, none of the bikers spoke. They just stood there watching the two kids hold each other, realizing that for all their tough exteriors, this was why they existed. Not for power, not for rebellion, but for moments like this. The police arrived minutes later, drawn by the commotion. The bikers didn't argue, didn't boast. They simply nodded and backed away, letting the officers handle the aftermath. As they stood by their bikes, Ryder looked at his brothers. They were all quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when adrenaline fades and purpose settles in. No one should ever feel alone in this world, he said finally. Not a kid, not ever. As they rode back through the bright, clean streets, Evan waved from the sidewalk, standing beside his sister and mother, who had just arrived in tears. She mouthed, "Thank you," over and over, but the roar of the engines drowned out her voice. It didn't matter. They'd heard it in their hearts. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, the bikes were parked again in a perfect line outside Ryder's house. The men sat in the shade, silent but proud. There was no celebration, just peace. Ryder leaned back on his seat, eyes closed, replaying that little voice in his mind. They took my sister. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belongs to a man who knows he's done something right. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness can come from the most unexpected hearts, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. These moments matter. They show that even in a world full of noise, humanity still speaks softly and acts boldly. Before the ending, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Ryder's place? Would you have ridden out, too? That day, the Hells Angels didn't wait for anyone to tell them what was right. They didn't wait for headlines or applause. They just rode, not for glory, but for a little boy's whisper that reminded them who they truly were. And as the engines faded into the distance, the world was reminded of something powerful. Kindness doesn't always wear a halo. Sometimes it wears leather.